If leadership is treating you like support staff, it's not necessarily because you're a junior. It's because you are legible to them as support. You see, in every organization, there's two types of value. There's value that helps, and there's value that leads. If you're being read as the person who helps, then you can be excellent but still be invisible to leadership roles. Because you're not being evaluated for promotion, you're being utilized for your helpfulness. In this video, I'm going to talk about 4 hidden laws that leaders use whether they admit it or not. And these laws is what determines whether or not you get filed as support staff or whether or not you get recognized as strategic leadership. The first hidden law is the law of assigned function. Now, many professionals have this false belief that if I'm really great at what I do, then I will naturally be seen as leadership eventually. But that's not always true, because leaders don't promote what you do, they promote what you are for. And what that means is that first they assign a function, and then they observe your behavior through that function. So then let's look at support staff. What's the function of support staff? It is execution, to make the system run. Well, what's the function of leadership? The function of leadership is enterprise consequence ownership. So you see, different function. And I have to emphasize this, support staff are not less valuable. It's just simply an entirely different economic category. The core distinction is what I call the economic value of perception, which means that the way you're perceived in that function, there's an economic value to that. And your perceived function is what will determine what you get invited into. So for example, if other people perceive you through the function of support, then what they experience is a value of relief. And relief feels like you coming in, you're saving the day, you're filling in the gaps, you make things run more smoothly, you're putting out fires, you're dependable, right? You are there when they need you. So those are examples of how they experience relief. And this really is a thing. I have a client who has been with a single organization for 18 years, and he leads a huge team. I think it was 115, 120 people team, and it's like a huge engineering team. And he's been leading this team for a long time. And he's built a team that's very loyal to him, very good at what they do. And then he is now desiring to step up into senior level leadership. And it's been 18 years. And there's kind of a question of, well, why are they not perceiving my value? And that's exactly it. When I coached him, when I talked to him, I started hearing a pattern was that really his economic value of perception was one of relief. He really was there, putting out fires, saving the day, right? A lot of conversations around him would be like, oh, I'm so glad that you're here. Oh, thank you for doing that for me. I really appreciate it. Like those types of relief, right? So this is important to reflect. What's the economic value of the perception of that people have of you? On the other hand, leadership perception is formed when your value is perceived as direction. And here's what direction feels like, right? Direction is when you are able to articulate real value, when you're able to reframe the trade-offs, when you're able to communicate strategically and diplomatically, when you're able to hold the line and navigate through conflicting perspectives. Things like that is direction. Now, the same client I talked about earlier, he came into my mentorship and I had a conversation with him face-to-face, well, virtually face-to-face. And I talked to him about, well, here's where you have been focusing a lot on putting out fires and relief work. Here's the shifts you need to make to be able to be perceived as leadership and come across as giving direction. And really what it starts with is a complete change in your mindset. Because when your mindset shifts, the way you show up changes, and the way you think about your situation, the way you think about your role, the way you think about yourself completely changes. And as soon as that shifted, I could actually see that shift, the change in him. And the moment it did, the next time I had a conversation with him on our catch-up, it was completely different. There was more clarity, there was more grounding, more certainty, and he didn't have to put out fires anymore. There was no more saving people, filling up gaps. There was no more of that. It was a completely different strategy. Changes the game for you, it can change the game for him, and it can change the game for you. And this transformation, unfortunately, is not very obvious. And the reason why is because most high-performing leaders, they train the next generation of leaders, right? And because you got to delegate and train the next generation. And what I'm noticing after more than a decade of working with senior leaders is that oftentimes in corporate environments, leaders train their their successors. They accidentally train them as relief. And when they give this leadership training, traditionally, they're training them on how to close the gap, on how to put out fires, on how to be relief for the organization, and how to be a support staff. And a lot of leadership training and performance training, it really has those undertones. It's unfortunate, but that's how it's always been. And this is the gap that I see in leadership training. It's the gap that I see in terms of succession planning within an organization as well. And that's why a lot of talented people who really do have vision and have that capability of enterprise-wide leadership, they aren't seen as leadership. They aren't given these opportunities. And at the same time, they themselves are wondering why they aren't being given more strategic level decisions and making these leadership decisions. And it's simply because of the way that's been set up. And sometimes it's a result of the way KPIs are set up in organizations. It's all relief work, right? And that's why if you as an individual, that you're capable of more, and it is aligned with your personal goals and your professional goals, the onus is on you to have this clarity on what's really going on and what is stopping you. And if you're unclear on that, then I invite you to work with me. Below this video, in the description, there's a link where you can speak to one of my trusted career advisors. If you want to have my eyes and ears on your situation, then this is how we can make it work. Have a conversation with my career advisors, and they're going to have just a conversation, no pressure, to understand your situation, your goals as well, perhaps some of the obstacles that may not be obvious to you, but they're going to be able to identify that. And if it makes sense, then you'll be invited into my mentorship. And that's where I can start to work with you and have my consultation as well, and give you my best strategies, proven strategies on how to make those shifts. The second hidden law is the law of ambiguity ownership. Most professionals believe that collaboration earns trust, and it does to an extent, until it becomes an access. And in excess collaboration is a disguise for dependency. And here's what I mean by that. If every significant or meaningful moment you are seeking direction, you are asking for feedback, you are seeking for validation, you're seeking support, you're escalating, you are also asking for permission, then you're already signaling support function. Because here's the thing. Authority is granted to those who can carry the weight of consequences, who can carry the weight of unknowns, especially unknown consequences. And that's really what leadership is. Leadership is not about having certainty. Leadership is about being able to carry the weight of ambiguity, which is what I call ambiguity ownership. Because when you escalate upwards, what you're really doing is you're escalating upwards the ambiguity. And what that does in the end, it increases the cognitive load and the number of decisions that senior leaders need to make. These are decisions and cognitive loads that you could have taken on to demonstrate your leadership capacity, instead of being a support person to carry out the decision they decide that you could have decided. So this is really important to reflect on. How have you been showing up? Especially when there are significant moments or meaningful moments like this. When the situation is unclear, do you expand the senior leader's cognitive load or do you reduce it? See, if support staff will send that ambiguity upwards and then focus on keeping the operation stable because support staff is in execution. Leadership, on the other hand, is able to metabolize ambiguity. They're able to translate that into options, and then they own the consequences of whatever decisions gets made. The third hidden law is the law of exposure language. Well, first, let me begin by sharing with you another false belief that I hear quite often in my coaching community. It's the false belief that if I demonstrate how much I do, then leaders will see my value. It's not necessarily true. Because even if you try to articulate and show them how much you are doing, doesn't necessarily mean that they really understand it. And even if they do understand some of it, they may only value what you do for support. The more you try to demonstrate how much you're doing, the more your value is tied to doing. And the more your value is tied to doing activities, the easier it is to replace you with systems and processes and lower cost resources. Besides, leadership does not value activities or volume activities. What leadership values the most is they value the reduction of exposure. Now, what's exposure? Exposure is, for example, exposure is what can break, what can get delayed, what can be damaged, what can create unwanted surprises. This is all exposure. And individuals who receive the recognition and the visibility are the ones who can effectively identify and reduce exposure. See, when you're a support staff, you speak a certain language. The language of support staff are things like task completion, progress update, and they are metrics and personal productivity. Those is the language of support. The language of leadership is completely different. The language of leadership is exposure language. So this is where they talk about trade-offs, they talk about risk, they talk about the costs of inaction, they have a P&L sheet, they talk about the nuances of decision-making. That's exposure language. The moment that you can shift from speaking the language of support to speaking the language of exposure, you will not be seen as helper, but instead, your perception of value, you will be perceived for the function of leadership. The fourth hidden law is the law of signal to noise. Presence is an organizational signal that either expands volatility or it reduces it, and it originates from your nervous system. And I'm referring to your autonomous nervous system, which is a balance between your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous system. Whenever there is an imbalance in your presence or a lack of presence, that tends towards increasing a sympathetic response in your nervous system, which now you have fight or flight, fawn or freeze. And this is an increased sympathetic response. And that's the output, the exhibition of that is a lack of presence, right? A lack of executive presence. But what leadership is looking for individuals who can bring certainty and bring greater clarity than what was before without drama. And the drama comes from the increased sympathetic response because it is a dramatic response of fight or flight, freeze or fawn. That's the drama that comes with it. You see, when you have support staff and it's a support mindset, it tends towards reactivity, right? And if your support mindset coming into a decision-making room or in front of senior decision makers, then the tendency is an overactivation of the sympathetic nervous system response, fight or flight, fawn or freeze. And as a result of that, the exhibition is over-explaining, over-sharing details, over trying to prove yourself, trying to wear a mask and try to be someone that you're not, trying to fake it until you make it, all sorts of things. That's reactivity. Leadership, however, shows up completely different. Senior leadership that have an enterprise strategic mindset, they come up owning consequences, they own ambiguity, what I mentioned before, and as a result of that, they have executive presence, and that is selective. It's not reactive, it's selective. So what do I mean by that? You see, when you're reactive, you can't be selective because you can't help it. Your emotions are showing up and you just can't help it. You can't help but feel that way. You can't help but react that way or respond that way. But if you have presence, you have a balance. It's no longer dramatic. It's not about an overactivation of your sympathetic nervous system or an overreactivation of your parasympathetic nervous system. It really is. It really starts with your nervous system. You have the balance. You're centered. And as a result, you can be selective. Selective of what? Well, you can choose your response. You can choose how you show up. You can choose who you really are. You can choose how you react. You can choose your perceptions. You can choose your decisions and your actions. And that is more powerful than the exact words you say or how perfect that you appear. That's more important. That's more powerful than that. But it's also a very difficult thing to achieve because in the environment that you're playing in, it is highly competitive. And there's assessment, there's a judgment, there's criticism all the time. And that's what makes it so difficult. But here's the thing. If you're a leader with balance, and you are increasing the signal to the noise in the room, then you have a higher psychological perception of value. That's what presence is, psychological perception of value. And you're somebody who comes into the room and raises the signal to noise, which means that the cognitive intelligence of the room is increased as a result of you being there and participating. And that's what leaders can see, and they can palpably measure that. So the identity shift here is that your presence is not merely a tool that you use. It's not something you practice. It's not something you do, but it's an instrument of the clarity that you can bring into the room. If you take nothing else from this video, take this, that leadership is not confused about you. They've been classifying you based on these hidden laws. And if you've been trying to have your advancement and you've been trying to do that through effort, then you've been playing the wrong game because effort is proof of work. but these laws are proof of leadership. When you shift from relief to direction, from escalation to ownership, from activity to exposure, and from noise to clarity, you stop being utilized and you start being trusted. And trust is the currency that converts to authority.